the nations, big and small, among the 193 countries in the United Nations, as well as one of the leading supporting voices for the developing and newly emerging nations. To enhance the power of the bloc of poorer nations, China in September 2025 introduced the Global Governance Initiative, advised on reform of international rules to increase the representation of the Global South countries. Let's move on sa ating slide. This is my last slide. The building blocks towards the Global Governance Initiative initiated earlier are the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, and the Global Civilization Initiative, covering the major concerns of the global majority and humanity of economically developing nations, assuring indivisible security for all nations, promoting quote-unquote multilateralism, and harmonizing civilization to overcome clashes of normative value. Nearly 160 countries and international organizations have backed or participated in the Global Governance Initiative. More than 60 countries have joined the formal group of friends of global governance. The Global Governance Initiative is a practical, strategic action plan and organization to achieve the final end of the quote-unquote community of shared future for mankind and the cherished dream of quote-unquote forever peace to end the West, forever war. So, for Vadis, Philippines, where to, Philippines? Where are you going, Philippines? Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi on July 22nd, 2026, during a bilateral meeting in Manila with Foreign Affairs Secretary Maria Teresa Nazaro on the sidelines of the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting, remarked that China-Philippines bilateral ties face serious difficulties and advising Manila to choose the correct path and avoid acting as a pawn for external forces. In short, the Philippines stands at the crossroads between the path towards peaceful development or the path the way of Ukraine. Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim has openly and forcefully protested the US-Philippine expansion of military activities and military bases in Mindanao and Palawan. Singapore's former Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong has openly asked over Philippine media if the Philippines wants to be caught in a superpower conflict. The silent message is the Philippines is drifting away from ZOPPAN, the ASEAN zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality pact. President Marcos Jr. in reaction in July 2026 called for a quote-unquote reset in Philippine-China relations. The primary objective is establishing communication channels to avoid miscalculations or dangerous maneuvers between Coast Guard vessels at sea and de-escalate and make progress on joint oil and gas exploration with China. But the question is, can this prosper when his defense secretary and defense establishment are taking illegal actions against Chinese nationals and enterprises and contradicting official Philippine government policies from the Department of Foreign Affairs and even Malacanang in their undertakings in China and the Philippines? So that's what we have. What time is it? Let's check it. Thank you for arriving at Tribune and the RJ.
Thank you.
Manila time to from the way.
Thank you for our media friends for joining us. Thank you, Kamentong, for that very enlightening and thought-provoking presentation on the inevitable rise of China. Our next speaker will be Dr. Enrico Gloria. As mentioned earlier, he is a doctor of philosophy, political science PhD from Tsinghua University. And the title of his presentation is China's Rise and the Principles of its Foreign Policy. He's joining us right now via Zoom. So, Dr. Gloria, please welcome him for his opening remarks. Thank you.
Hindi ba so, my audio is
Very clear.
so I'm happy to talk to you.
Okay, how do I? Ayan, is the audio still clear? Thank you. All right, I hope everyone can hear me well. Just let me know if there's any trouble with my slides or with the audio, no? So again, thank you for having me. I'd like to thank the organizers for allowing me to share some of my views on China's foreign policy. Again, my name is Assistant Professor Enrico Gloria. I currently teach at the University of the Philippines, the Department of Political Science. So the topic of my presentation for today is really just some broad stroke principles on China's foreign policy, China's rise, and what this entails for the Philippines. So without further ado, allow me to share my slides. All right, I hope that you can see my slides, no? So I've already flashed them. All right, so I guess the central question that we need to ponder, no, especially for the average Filipino, is why do we need to care about China? And why do we need to care about China's rise for that matter? No? So to simplify things, no, I see these three principles or these three considerations that ultimately call for increased attention on China's foreign policy. First, obviously, is because of our security concerns with China. No? So China matters because we currently have territorial disputes with China. No, although the waters are disputed, right? It is in the Philippine national interest to protect its territorial integrity in the West Philippine Sea, and given territorial claims that we have with China, there are obvious important security implications in that area. No, but beyond the issue of West Philippine Sea, anything that happens in the region will ultimately have global repercussions and consequences, right? And China, by the sheer size of its geography, its population, and economy, whatever it does will definitely spill over in the security aspect, no? Especially in the region. So that's very straightforward to understand. But at the same time, no, China is also leading the march towards global prosperity. No? As many have already argued, right now is an Asian century, and leading that march towards the Asian century is China's prosperity, right? So the scale with which it has lifted people out of poverty within its borders is truly remarkable, right? Without that remarkable achievement in poverty alleviation, I think we would not be in the position today where our global economy is thriving, no? Especially at the Asian region. So prosperity is one of the many things why we need to focus on China. And at the same time, no, with fourth industrial revolution within our midst, China is also leading the pack when it comes to innovation in the high-tech industries such as artificial intelligence, no? So we really need to focus on the developments happening in China with respect to those areas. But at the same time, I think what's most interesting is China, despite those innovations and at the same time its remarkable achievements when it comes to ensuring prosperity for its entire economy. It is a major power, yes, but it is also a developing country. So this duality that China embraces for itself is something unique for China as a major power, right? When we think of major powers in history, We think of the United States, we think of the UK, Spain, the Netherlands, France, no? These European major powers, no, didn't have that duality that China possesses, and at the same time makes it unique, no? Because China is a developing country, because China is also a victim, if you will, of Western aggression in the past, it's able to assume that perspective wherein, yes, we are rising, and yes, we are assuming this major power position towards probably global multipolarity. But at the same time, we have that hindsight of what happened in the past, and hopefully that will not be repeated again. So combining all these three aspects or simplifications, if you will, no, I hope our audience today can understand that China does matter, no, not just for the Philippines, but really for the entire world. No? So with that, a little bit of background on China's rise, at least how the Chinese think about their rise and their position and their status in the global order. So first, we have to emphasize that China's rise did not happen, in the blink of an eye. No, it didn't happen yesterday, but actually a product of China's long economic transformation, tracing from the founding of the republic, right? So yes, this is a common sense fact, no. But I think the current impression is that China's rise happened when it coincided with its increasing assertiveness in the West Philippine Sea, for instance. China's rise is something that happened after the global financial crisis. No? While some of those assumptions can be perceived as true, we have to understand that it's ultimately a confluence of factors and an accumulation of efforts that can be traced, no, or that can be attributable to the Communist Party itself, no, their dedication to transform their economy from a basic agricultural economy towards now that it's highly dependent on high-level industries, no. So that in itself is a testament to the enduring leadership of the party and the capability of the party to mobilize such a huge population towards a single goal of economic transformation. No? And admittedly, China also had made very important pragmatist innovations, if you will, in terms of how it has refined the communist ideology uh, as it sees fit, no, um, in in serving its goals and needs as a nation, no. So China, we must also realize that China did indeed embrace economic interdependence, no, right after the Second World War, right, and this is um this is very apparent when it entered the WTO, right? And when the rest of the world allowed China to actually be part of the WTO. No? So economic interdependence, and with that, economic liberalism had a lot to do with China's rise. No? And on their part, China is unapologetic about this truth in their approach. No, so China is not purely a communist in the academic sense of the concept. No, but it actually made communism work for its requirements, for what it needs to truly develop, given the limitations and constraints that it is working with, right? Most specifically, that it has the most number of population, no, when it was still rising, and at the same time, no, given that it is still again a developing country. So with that, the embrace of economic interdependence, working with Western liberal powers and the rest of the world, really, that has also been a great source of legitimacy for the party. No? And I think when we understand China's rise is actually part of the reason why the Communist Party is still in its rightful position in China as we speak today, right? So without the continuous rise and without the quality that it provides to its population, no, I don't think the Communist Party will enjoy the overwhelming trust that it currently has today, right? So China's rise in that sense is not only geared externally, no, for the sake of, for instance, increasing or widening its influence at a global scale, which I think is the common conception of China's rise, no. But China's rise has some deeper domestic necessity for the party's legitimacy and at the same time for the prosperity of its people, right? So therefore, China's rise is not a product of isolation as most of us would think, right? Because it's a communist country, therefore it tends to be an isolationist, no? But it's actually the opposite, no? China embraced its own brand of socialism, which again is coupled with the pragmatism of embracing liberal economic values, right? So, or in China's words, it's a socialism with Chinese characteristics, really. And if we're going to emphasize some sort of causality there, in China's perspective, it is precisely their continuous commitment to their own brand of socialism that contributed to China's tremendous rise, no, in modern history, right? So with that, I'd also like to stress that China doesn't seek to export its own type of political system to other parts of the world precisely because they believe of there's a certain exceptionalism there. So China's experience is unique. The way it redesigned socialism, infuse it with liberal economic values is something that they can attest has worked for them, but they are not confident enough yet to say that this could actually work for the Philippines or for other countries that are still developing, right? Which I think is also quite the characteristic of China's foreign policy when it commits itself to non-interference or to basically to the diversity of political systems that must populate the global system, right? So more on that long economic transformation, no? So I'd like to stress again socialism in China and China's path to national reconstruction uh right right during the point when it was when the republic was found, no? So after decades of war and foreign domination, China's leaders saw socialism and industrialization as the route to national strength, right? So it's important to emphasize this because you can see the obsession, if you will, and the anxiety of China's leaders uh, from Mao down to Xi Jinping today, that their focus is really to continue industrializing the nation because they have many mouths to feed. They cannot afford for their economy to be stuck at a low value level where it continues to export low value products. No, so from the three socialist transformations in the 50s, no, where agriculture, handicrafts, and private industries were reorganized, no, towards a socialist brand of ownership. And then industrialization happened rapidly because of that, no, where the Soviet Union, where they basically um, uh, borrowed heavily from Soviet style planning, no, to industrialize their own national industries, which ultimately led to the expansion of state capacity and then made in China as we know it, where you see the export market being populated with all these Chinese goods back from the 80s to the 2000s, right? So that is the story of how from a socialist country it was able to depend on an export type of development and ultimately from that no use that as capital if you will to continue modernizing its industries. So ultimately it rejected and it evolved from that Soviet inspired central planning no to again to embracing a type of economic liberalism where when it entered the WTO, no, it also focused on diversifying its supply chains and with the goal of moving up the value chain and hopefully, and they have done this very well, exporting high level products from which more efficiency and more income ultimately can be distributed to the Chinese population. So the bottom line takeaway here is this period of industrialization built important state and foundations that are crucial, no, to China's rise and China's continuous rise and development. But at the same time, I think the Chinese leadership is also aware that the radical campaigns that it introduced, especially in the early history of the Communist Party, also caused severe disruption, famine, and suffering to its population. When I was studying in China, I think they are also aware that Mao Zedong has the reputation that it has, no, globally. And the way they justify it is that Mao Zedong can be forgiven or can be basically revered for 70% of the things he has done. And probably 30% is something that can be attributed to the disruptions that we associate, no, with the Chinese economy during the Great Famine and the Cultural Revolution. So there's a modesty, if you will, there, and there's an honesty in the legacy of their great leader. So these are the national values that I think I always see, no, in China, spread around every streets, no. Parang sa lahat ng kanto na madadaanan mo, these national values are always there to sort of remind the Chinese population that we operate on one operating system, and that is socialism with Chinese characteristics. And this is just one concretization, if you will, of how socialism with Chinese characteristics is exercised, no, and continuously being introduced to the population. And in fairness to the Chinese population, they know these by heart. No, the 24 core socialist values is something that are taught to them from elementary continuously down to their university years, right? So the common slogan is remain true to our original aspiration and keep our mission firmly in mind. No, 不忘初心，牢记使命. So it's really it's a national commitment towards ensuring that China continuously rise, right? And at the same time, to achieve that, what they call China dream, right? So the Chinese dream is basically a lot of the understanding of Chinese dream is, for a lack of a better term, some people would think of it as like China's world domination. So Chinese dream, no, is to be on the top of the world pecking order, and to basically every country will submit to what China wants. No, and I think this is a wrong misconception of Chinese dream and China's rise. No, again, as I've emphasized at the beginning of my presentation here, China's rise, China's dream is really geared towards domestic goals. No, and the goal domestically is to ensure that the regime is legitimate, and regime legitimacy is ensured if prosperity and development is continuously provided to the 1.4 billion population of China, right? So domestic pa rin yung primary concerns ni China, right? So if we consider that fact as the central truth that guides China's political system and China's foreign policy, then I think we would have a more benign perspective of where China's foreign policy is heading, right? If we put ourselves in the shoes of the Communist Party, their concern is, how do we ensure that all of these people, 1/7 of the global population, is happy and thriving, right? So they cannot be bothered by the liberal aspirations of free speech, of basically ensuring that all of their individual concerns are respected. They have to look at China as a whole and ensure that the strategy is the most efficient strategy to ensuring economic growth and equitable development, right? So that in itself also manifests in its foreign policy, and it's in its diplomacy, in its periphery and neighborhood, as I will emphasize later on. So again, economic reforms and China's transformation, no? So though I have emphasized that China sort of tweaked socialism to emphasize economic interdependence and integration, that was not the end goal. No? But at the same time, no, it really when China did that and when China embraced economic interdependence, major power status came with it, right? So economic interdependence was a tool that China willingly embraced so that it can achieve that awesome transformation that we know of that China has achieved. No? But at the same time, by doing so, it catapulted China to major power status, right? So again, market reforms in the 1970s and then Deng Xiaoping's Southern Tour, which is very reminiscent of China's commitment to opening up to the rest of the world, WTO integration, and then ultimately global financial crisis, which is the main testing point for what China has achieved. That cemented China to global power status. No? In China, 2008 is celebrated as their coming out year. No? So they hosted the Beijing Olympics in 2008, right? And 2008 was also the global financial crisis. While everyone else was reeling with that crisis, China was thriving. That's the message, that we are a source of stability in this otherwise unraveling global economy, right? So global integration turned China into the factory of the world into the early years where it entered the global economy. And that also helped China build the necessary economic foundations for its technological, military, and by extension, diplomatic power, right? So these are my books in China when I was studying Chinese, and you can see that in the front cover it's the bird's nest, and and also in the other book naman you have the Gautier, which is their high-speed railway. So and these two innovations, if you will, were launched around 2008, no, during that time in China. So for them, it's really like a symbolism of how China has developed, no, and China has come a long way in terms of really developing and achieving global power status. There's a sense of pride there, no, that they want to continuously tell to the world that we are no longer the China of the past, the sick man of Asia, and we have actually arrived. And what better way to tell that story than to the international students learning Chinese, right? That Beijing is this city of prosperity and advanced development. And personally, having lived in Beijing for 7 years, I can attest to that, right? It's better than Tokyo. Everything is connected through your phone. So it's a QR economy. Everything is connected through a QR code. And I think the most important thing that I really ascribe to Beijing as a utopia is the public safety. So you can just leave your bike, leave your things unattended in Beijing, in the university library, even in restaurants, and no one will really mind. So the development is there, yes, economic development, prosperity, but at the same time, the advancement of the civilization is also apparent in China's rise. So China's rise, I think, can within the current context. So let's say post-pandemic, no. So 百年未有之大变局. So great changes unseen in a century. This is a slogan that they have embedded in all of their foreign policy discourses, right? In this context of great changes unseen in a century, right? As China would always say it, China must embrace proactiveness in the way that it shapes or it designs global governance, and therefore in the way it forwards its own foreign policy. By consistently recognizing that there are indeed great changes unseen in a century, China has moved from a passive global power to a more proactive global power. No? So I think this proactiveness started around 2012. Some would say in the literature as early as 2009. No? But I think it became more evident during the pandemic. No? So with that, no, with China taking a more proactive role, the debate now is China a revisionist or a status quo power, right? So revisionist in a sense that it is trying to redo everything that the Western liberal order has achieved under the leadership, of course, of the United States as the major power after the Second World War, or as the sole unipolar power after the Second World War. And there are those who are saying that China can still be considered as a status quo power, right? And I think from the Chinese leaders' perspective, China is definitely still a status quo power. No, so for them, yes, we have risen to power and we are being more proactive about it, but we are not necessarily changing the international system that was established after the Second World War. We are simply fixing it. So I think there's a very important distinction there. From China's view, the current international system is broken and it has failed the promise that was done, no, after the Second World War. No? The Bretton Woods system must also evolve in China's perspective, no, because it is already not addressing the needs of the current needs of the times, no, especially with great changes unseen in a century. And this is where China seeks to pursue a distinct path towards major power status, right? So I'm a firm believer that, and through my studies and own research, no, that China is really obsessed in trying to distinguish itself from the Western powers in history. Whether that is a good thing or a bad thing is a normative judgment open for everyone. But there are signs that China doesn't want to follow the path that was forged by the Western powers. And for them, there are many principles that Western major powers have embraced that China will never embrace. For instance, Cold War politics, no, or hegemonism. So these concepts we always see in China's foreign policy pronouncements. In China's POV, no, the Western powers, specifically the United States, have embraced alliances in the service so that it can continue to be the major power or the sole major power. No, it's a very realist reading of how major powers have risen in history, no, and what they intend to do with that power. For China, it still believes that it is indeed a benevolent major power, that yes, it will rise, but at the same time, it embraces this idea of a community of shared future, no, where basically it's a win-win situation for everyone. No, we focus on common prosperity. Yes, we would have differences in certain areas, but they do not need to define how we do major power relations or basically diplomacy with our neighboring countries. So we are seeing a more proactive role in global governance as well, as evidenced by the many international institutions that China has spearheaded. For instance, you have of course, the Belt and Road Initiative, the AIIB, SCO, BRICS, and the new global development, global security, and global civilization initiatives. So a lot of these experiments, if you will, has to do with China really wanting to have a more proactive role in global governance. And we also have to understand the context that US under Trump has grown more internalist in its global positioning, right? So Trump has focused more on other issues that, in China's perspective, gives it more room to actually impose its major power status in the international system. So, but again, I'd like to emphasize that China's rise uh has also been a point of contention also, no, for other major powers, right? Before, the idea was to engage China in the 90s to the 2000s, in the hopes that it may also become one of us. No? It may also become a democratic major power. No? But 2000s onwards, it has becoming clearer for the established major powers, no, the Western powers, that China is not diverging or is not going to the path of the Western liberal order, no, and therefore competition became more pronounced in the 2010s onward. And now China under Xi Jinping is actively focused on consolidating its power and ultimately increasing its influence in the international system. So I think where the West, what the West got wrong here, and I think this is not only the Western country's fault, but I think the international system as a whole, is the proclivity towards democracy as a panacea, right? So back in the day, it was very stylish to think of democracy as something that would ensure peace in the international system and continued global prosperity. It's basically the neoliberal promise that only if countries become democratic like the West can we achieve the good life, so to speak. No? But China's example have shown a different path, no? Socialism with Chinese characteristics. And that in itself is not only legitimizing the regime, but at the same time, legitimizing the idea that China indeed wants to become this distinct or this different major power. Right? So on China's foreign policy, no, it's without a doubt that it's just like any other country, like the Philippines, the United States, its foreign policy is motivated by core interests, right? So He So and in the He of China, there are many things, but mostly territorial sovereignty, from Taiwan to Hong Kong, ensuring stability in Xinjiang and Xizang, Tibet, and East China Sea and South China Sea. So many conceptualizations of what core interests look like for China. But I think all of these conceptualizations agree that Taiwan is number one. They kind of disagree where South China is, if it's a core interest or if it's just one of the core interests. So, but basically, much of that is really about territorial integrity for China and also the stability of China's political system, or basically the stability of the Communist Party as the de facto leadership in China's political system. And in conjunction with those core interests, again, China's foreign policy is all about maintaining a stable global environment so that it can continue rising. Rise here is again has a lot of economic undertones. So prosperity for its population, again, it's still developing. No, it has not even reached yet the advanced economy income level at a per capita basis, right? So the double centennial goals of 2039 and 2050, those are the concrete goals that they want to achieve. That by 2039, at least it has already entered the advanced economy level status. And then by 2049, it has already achieved, or China has already become one of the top economies, no, in terms of GDP per capita, right? So those are the goals, concrete goals that China has set their eyes on. And I don't think it's about global dominance and again unraveling the current system and making sure that it occupies all these territories and become a new empire. No? And I think the layman understanding is still within that perspective. Hence, we are embracing, or a lot in the global community is continuously embracing this China threat narrative. No? So, core interests, in addition to that, I think it also must be emphasized that China's periphery and neighborhood is very central to its foreign policy, precisely because it is its for a lack of a better term, it is its playground. No, it's its testing ground to show to the rest of the world that If you lean closer with China and if you work closely with China, prosperity can be win-win, right? So, and that is what China is trying to show to everyone through these global institutions. No, if you allow us to have a seat in the driver's seat, prosperity can actually happen for everyone. Take the case, for instance, of what we are doing with Southeast Asia, right? Those countries who have aligned themselves closely with China, and who have chose to work in common interests and not on the thorny issues, have actually prospered. So that's the Chinese narrative, and that's what China has continuously emphasized when it comes to its foreign policy in the neighborhood, right? So, and at the same time, China, I've observed, has also continuously invoked this idea of an Asian community, and basically there's this deep affinity that China has with other Southeast Asian countries that they argue cannot be invoked by the traditional Western powers of the past. And again, this goes to the idea that China really seeks to be distinct, to be a distinct major power, you know, and one of its source of distinctiveness, it is a truly Asian major power that remains cognizant of its historical legacies that it shares with other Southeast Asian countries. We are both Asian countries. We are both victims of Western aggression and expansionism, you know, and we are both developing countries. Not to mention our cultural sensitivities easily translate with each other. Combine all these commonalities together for China. If we're going to expand our power and influence and really emphasize the benevolent nature of our power, then we have to start focusing on our neighborhood first, right? So that is why, if we will remember last year, 2025, when Trump announced the D-Day tariffs and basically the tariffs to everyone, no? The first attention of China's Xi Jinping was to reassure its neighbors and to basically reassure and at the same time explore Plan Bs together with its neighbors in Southeast Asia. No? So combine this all together. Again, my central thesis is that distinctiveness also motivates China's foreign policy. It wants to be um, it wants to be perceived, yes. So at the perception level, China wants everyone to appreciate China's power as different from other Western powers. But at the same time, this is not distinctiveness for distinctiveness sake. No? The very thinking, the very foreign policy logic of China is actually what makes it distinct. No? It thinks in a long-term perspective, and it thinks in terms of generations, if not dynasties of leadership. No? That, for instance, if it fails in ensuring prosperity and the continuous rise of China, then it will inevitably lose the mandate of heaven or the mandate of its people. So another central thesis to how I see China's foreign policy is the enduring legacy of humiliation and defeat. My argument is that no historical experience has shaped China's contemporary foreign policy outlook more deeply than what happened to it, no, during the century of humiliation. So the century of humiliation, no, has been invoked countless times, no, whenever China tries to explain its foreign policy logic and its position when it comes to ensuring that the current international system is maintained, for instance, and secured. So we can also see this in how history is being taught in China, in the museums that I've been to. No? I think there's a national consensus that we must never forget what happened in the history from 1839 down to the founding of the Republic, right? So you might say that China has embraced this victimhood mentality. Yes, to a certain extent, that's still true today. No? And I think there are also incentives for the Communist Party to keep on milking, if you will, this victimhood narrative so that it can conveniently justify its actions on the ground. I think there's some reason to believe that. But at the same time, no, you can also not discount or discredit the fact that from China's storytelling, no, whatever it has achieved after the Second World War, the spoils of that or the rewards of that has not been rightfully given to China yet. For instance, the territories that it's currently seeking or it asserts that it has rights to, a lot of that has very important connections with what happened in history. And we also see some indications that China is interpreting the present through the lens of the past, no? So for instance, concerns over sovereignty, territorial integrity, and foreign pressure and foreign interference, for them, it sort of reflects that the past is happening again. And we must not allow or never again to the past repeating itself. No? So for instance, disputes over Japanese war memory and for instances or indications that the Western countries are undermining China's political system or are discriminating against China's political system. These particular offenses are very sensitive for the Chinese population. And it means that the history is still pretty much present in the Chinese thinking, especially when they try to think of themselves in the contemporary setting. And again, as consistent with the idea that core interests motivates China's foreign policy, invoking century of humiliation and China's glorious history of victory or basically winning the Second World War, it also legitimizes the guardianship of the Communist Party. So these are some of the slogans in the right side is from my university at Tsinghua, the one with the red banners, no? And 无忘过去，愿蒙重花. So it's basically never forget national humiliation, no? And collectively pursue or dream about the Chinese dream, no? So something like that. So all of this is tying the history towards that national goal of rising together or collectively rising together. No? And here naman, the left side is the museum at Nanjing. So it's the Museum of Japanese Atrocities. No? So 人类记忆和平远近. So basically, we must remember or the people of the world should continuously remember what happened in the past so that we can collectively aspire for that vision of peace, no? Or for that collective vision of peace, right? So China, while it continuously invokes the past to justify its actions today, they are also actively saying that this historical memory is also tied to that objective of China to continuously be peaceful or a peaceful major power, right? So when China says that it is peaceful in the South China Sea disputes or that it is peaceful towards its neighbors, towards its major power counterparts, one can actually say that it has historical elements to it and it has victimhood elements to it. China doesn't want the past to repeat itself because China was the victim number one in the past, no? And at least that is in according to its own storytelling. So again, embracing a non-Western image of peace and prosperity, I think that's the central distinguishing factor that China wants to embrace for itself or China wants to assume for itself, no? So because of that painful historical legacy, China has tried so hard to distinguish itself from past powers and aggressors, right? So, China, for instance, together with Burma and Indonesia, presented this five principles of Burma and India, rather, the five principles of peaceful coexistence, right? So until now, these five principles as a discursive element in China's foreign policy remains very much intact, right? So mutual respect for sovereignty, mutual non-aggression, non-interference in the internal affairs of others, equality and mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence, right? These principles are deeply enshrined in China's foreign policy making. And one can question that this is purely rhetoric, this is purely discursive. I get that criticism, but at the same time, the reality is China's consistently invoked this. China's consistently presented this as their policy, and other countries have also embraced it as a policy of their own. That in itself is testament to the legacy of China's foreign policy principles. Whether that is exercised in the ground on in reality is up for debate. No? But I think we must also not take for granted that China has consistently emphasized this. No? If China has consistently emphasized this, then at the very least, we can take them into account and use these principles as basically justification for our criticism of China's foreign policy. Or at the very least, no, we can learn more how to appreciate China's position or their perspective on why they have pursued certain foreign policy behaviors that at the surface level might not be acceptable for us. The point is, we must not take for granted China's foreign policy perspectives. I think there's a lot of mistrust, definitely, and a lot of that mistrust stems from the misunderstanding that we have towards each other. In our part, no, there's a misunderstanding in the sense that we have not really appreciated China's foreign policy from a longer, a much wider perspective, which I want to really emphasize in my lecture here. No, but from their side, China too must also start embracing or learning the perspective of the Filipinos. No? Us Filipinos, our history of being a colony is much longer than our history of being an independent nation. And that in itself sort of messes with your mentality on how our foreign policy needs to look like. No, one way or another, it enters in our decision making and in the crafting of our grand strategy, if you will. No? But at the same time, I think it would be unfair for the Philippines to always be relegated as an appendage of the United States. No? While there is some truth to that the US continuously influences our foreign policy through the alliance, no, that doesn't invalidate our territorial rights in the West Philippine Sea, and at the same time, the nationalist affinity that the normal Filipino has already attached in the West Philippine Sea. No? So again, there's a lot of together with what I'm doing here, trying to present a longer view of what Chinese foreign policy means. No, I think the other side must also try to have this same appreciation of Philippine foreign policy. So the non-negotiable of core in China's foreign policy, again, the Helsinki or the core interests are again legitimacy or the political stability of the Chinese Communist Party, sovereignty and national unity, development and rejuvenation of the country, so purely economic pa din, and maritime rights and strategic space. Some have also argued this to be part of core interests of China. So while China continues to emphasize that it is a peaceful major power, it aspires for peaceful rise and peaceful development. No, that doesn't imply that China will sit idly by or that there are no red lines or limits to its restraint. No, so I think China, in my opinion, is seriously exercising restraint in its actions. Although we might disagree with that with current tensions at sea, no, but from their perspective, again, they think that they are exercising restraint, no, and I think if we take that, if we take their word as it actually connects with basically their preference for being a peaceful major power, no. And we can talk more about that restraint aspect in China's foreign policy later. As for the instruments of China's foreign policy, basically China introduces international institutions to continuously shape global governance into something that's conducive for its peaceful rise. No? We have also seen China using economic coercion or countermeasures, as I have mentioned it, and gray zone tactics as well has been also predominant in China's arsenal. But again, across all these instruments, the underlying logic is still calibrated influence, where they seek to shape the choices that the counterparts have, and therefore they impose selective costs given that strategy and ensure that they remain flexible with the strategic choices that they have. So at this point, I'll pause here and maybe later we can discuss further with the audience, but I turn the floor over to the moderator. Thank you.
Marinig ba?
Yes.
Nawala siya.
Hello? Yes.
Tanggalan mo na lang, hawakan mo na lang yung mic. Sige, yan.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello, hello.
Yes.
Okay. So this is a question from Franco Baron from the Manila Times. Is China primarily a security threat, an economic partner, or both in your view?
Okay. I think China is more of an economic partner than a security threat, right? So kasi ang hirap ipagbangga yung dalawa eh kasi both perspectives in my opinion are valid. Why? But I think we have to focus on the economic partner more than the security threat. Why did I say that? Kasi Philippine-China relations, if we trace it across history, has always been about seeking common interests and trying to work on that. And this is exemplified by the many Chinese diaspora we have in the Philippines. They themselves are testament to the fact that when we talk about Philippine-China relations, since history, before 1975, it has always been about economic partnership. Having said that, security threat, I understand that perspective that probably today we might also consider China as a security threat. No? Precisely because we have imagined China to be such. And that imagination stems from our territorial interests in the West Philippine Sea. And I think our interests are definitely valid. And at the same time, it's really part of our sovereignty as a nation. No? But to basically limit the end-all and be-all of Philippine-China relations to that aspect alone, talagang mamamagnify yung threat perspective. And you would have this thinking that it's an either-or type of thing, that you need to focus on only the threat aspect and not the economic partnership aspect. I think that's a false thinking, and that's not very helpful if the goal is to cultivate mutual trust between the two countries. Having said that, I'm also not advocating that we completely let go of our territorial interests and basically not consider China as a challenge, when it comes to our territorial rights. China is a challenge when it comes to our territorial rights and interests, in the same way that Vietnam, Malaysia, and the other claimants are also posing a challenge in our territorial interests. No, with Malaysia in Sabah, for instance, in the same way, no, that China is also a challenger in that aspect of territorial rights. So yeah.
Based on your personal knowledge and understanding, are you optimistic about the China reset that is being pursued by this administration
Yeah.
beginning in this year?
I like that question. I think the China reset is it's exemplifying that indeed there's a commitment from our government to at least hold on to negotiations and continuous communication. That is important in itself. Kasi ang status quo na ng Philippine-China relations ngayon is really monthly skirmishes or tensions at sea. No, I think that's the status quo. We have to live with that. That there's going to be more of that. No, precisely because at least Philippines, no, the clamor for the government to do something in the West Philippine Sea is really high and it's really strong. And likewise in China, the clamor to respond to those assertions by the Philippines is also very high. So therefore, you would see these tensions continuously happening. Having said that, I think it's quite remarkable that Philippines and China still have that direct communication and they are continuously talking and finding creative ways, to manage the tensions at sea and to basically come up with some sort of a common understanding, if you will, on how to navigate tensions, not just in the South China Sea, but ultimately in our overall relations. So the reset is a good thing because it's an acknowledgement that the Philippines really cannot live with an angry China in its backyard. And at the same time, it's an acknowledgement that China still plays an important part in the Philippine development story, despite our competing interests. Yeah. Mm.
Miss Cathy Cruz from Tuklasin natin and a host of Philippine-China Talks. With 1.4 billion people in China, the population, what specific strategies and specific policy interventions, legislation, or what have you, can the Philippines adopt to achieve such remarkable economic and social development for our country? And what lessons, if any, can other developing countries like ours learn from China's experience?
Mm. I think what I really admired in China, and this is me talking from a perspective of someone who has lived there, as opposed to the perspective of an economist, which I'm not one. No? But I think yung immense investment nila when it comes to social services and ensuring that the quality of life of each Chinese citizen is secured of. No? So social services, so healthcare, for instance, access to quality education, access to housing, cheap housing, for at least, especially for those na nasa laylayan. No? It's really guaranteed and something that you can observe the government really focuses on. Even in times of crisis, for instance, during the pandemic, during my first year as a PhD student there, everyone was willing um, to follow the orders of the government because they see that they are also being taken care of despite the lockdowns and despite the limited movement. No? So there's this national trust that has been cultivated for the government precisely because the quality of the social services is really at a very high level, that you can only imagine for the Philippines, right? So for instance, in their state universities, the professors are well taken care of in terms of consistent funding, and basically the benefits that you would expect, from for a government employee or a government official, So the investment, the translation of taxes to tangible services, So I'm not so. I mean, corruption is definitely present in China. I mean, we can argue on that in different topic or in a different paper. But the translation of public funds to actual concrete services is more apparent in China. So you can see that in public works as well. No? So those I think we can sort of learn from China. But again, no, this has been a continuous problem of the Philippines, and I don't think the Chinese example is the magic bullet for the country, but definitely something to think about when we try to imagine Philippine-China relations and the tensions at sea. No, so here we are, uh, pitting ourselves against this major power who has done incredibly in terms of securing that its population is well fed, its population is secure economically, and tayo, we don't have our act together yet. So, what right do we have to actually be arrogant about our interests and our in competing against or in being very aggressive against China if we can't even fix these problems ourselves? Yeah.
Just a personal question of mine. You mentioned earlier that in China, the people don't mind if you leave your belongings, your laptop in the library,
Yeah.
public places, restaurants. So in the
Mm.
Philippines right now, we're experiencing a rise in apparent a rise in rampant crime, criminality. So what strategies can the Philippines learn from China with China's surveillance infrastructure, etc.? What can we learn from how they combat crime and why is it so safe there?
I think it's more than just surveillance and combating crime directly. I think at the heart of it is really the economic insecurity that your average Filipino experiences that ultimately pushes them to do these types of activities. No, at least that's my perspective. I mean, the reason why Beijing is so safe, it's because Beijing is a very prosperous capital. So I think prosperity and development must come first before we expect, and then safety, I think, will also follow suit. No, that doesn't mean that we should also discard surveillance and all these more proactive approaches in combating crime. But I truly believe that at the heart of it is the unequal access to opportunities and resources, which and then yung income inequality rin. In Beijing, income inequality, while it's still present, it's not as apparent in the Philippines, where on one hand you have BGC and then tawid ka lang, you have tagig as it is. No? So walang ganun sa Beijing. No? And I think that's one of the reasons why you also create this unsafe environment in the Philippines, no? Because resources are not spread equally, and a lot of our kababayans continue to live in the fringes. No? So yeah, I think it has to do with the really economic prosperity and equitable development.
So this is a bit extensive, but what are the key factors in your view, key factors and policies that have contributed to the significant improvement in the quality of life of the Chinese people, and to what extent has China's one-party political system
Yeah,
contributed to its development?
I was gonna say it's the party. No, I'm a firm believer that I think the ultimate reason why China developed the way it is tremendously is because of the resilience of the party and the commitment of the party to really serve the people. Yung serve the people, no, it's more than just a slogan. It's really like a norm or a religion, if you will, for all party members to abide by. No? So I was educated in UP. I teach in UP, and itong serve the people slogan, it's very popular in the Philippines. But for me, I really just realized the true essence of Wei Renminfu when I was in China, because the party members, the Communist Party was really about serving the people in a sense that you can just imagine a party cadre, a party secretary is willing to rotate no their position. So halimbawa party secretary ka ng Fujian, after your term as the party secretary of Fujian, not necessarily you'll stay there again. You will be definitely be relocated again to a different, like to Xizang or Tibet. No, so it's it's really a commitment to public service. No, and as a public servant myself, that is definitely quite refreshing and something that I take home from China. Na yung real sense of being nationalist and being serve the people type of spirit It's something that was perfectly embodied by the Communist Party, and it shows in the results of the development of the country. Sa atin, I think we have yet to imbibe that true sense or the genuine sense of serving the people, especially if we are still struggling with corruption, institutionalized corruption in the government, right? That is not serving the people, no? That is serving your own self through the pockets of the people. No? So I think the party itself played a huge role in the continued prosperity of the China, no? So the party is very disciplined in ensuring that it remains focused to that long-term view, long-term goal of rising from that century of humiliation, of achieving the Chinese dream, and ensuring that everyone in China, not just those in the eastern provinces, but everyone, including those of the West, develop in tandem with the rest of China. No? So, and you can only do that through a committed party that is consistently and continuously following a certain goal. No? Unlike, for instance, in a political system where you see changes of leadership, therefore changes of leadership priorities every 6 years, that's hard to follow if we transport the Philippine political system to China. You would imagine Tibet, no? Tibet is a very high altitude location. It would be hard to bring services to Tibet by itself, but China was able to do it. And they're able to do it because they have a committed political leadership, no, in the person of the party, right? So yeah, I think it's really the party that's the main explanatory variable there.
Well, I have a question.
Yes, po, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, po.
Yeah. You brought to the issue of gray zone operations of China. That's of course a very controversial issue.
Mhm.
But it is my perspective, it is my view that the gray zone operations are regular police operations, and the law enforcement operations using perfectly legal methods such as water cannons, non-lethal methods. But what do you think about the transparency initiative of the anti-China elements here, deliberately provoking us reactions of police action and having them as gray zone operations for media propaganda?
Sir, for the transparency initiative, I understand the logic on why it was introduced, precisely because the power asymmetry between China and the Philippines is really quite large. So from the Philippines perspective, parang we have to devise a creative way to sort of actively challenge what we perceive as China's increasing assertiveness in the area. And one of which is through the use of public diplomacy, naming and shaming China in these instances. So from a strategic point of view, it did make sense to introduce transparency as a form of a policy, or as a form of a behavior to address China's challenge. But at the same time, the consequences of that is also very apparent. And I think in some ways, it did limit our flexibility to negotiate with China at a level of trust where China can definitely trust us, and therefore we can move forward with something more concrete in managing the disputes. So I would even dare say it sort of heightened mistrust between the two countries, precisely because we have irritated China, through the transparency initiative. And at the same time, more on the transparency initiative, what I like about it is the domestic aspect of it, where it has, I think, it has the intention of educating Filipinos regarding our territorial rights in the West Philippine Sea. I think that's also a product of the transparency initiative. More than the name and shame, I think the name and shame got the press, for transparency initiative. There's also the domestic education campaign aspect. which, to be fair, China is also doing on their borders, no? Within their borders. China is constantly educating their people, their youth, that the South China Sea is a rightful territory of theirs, no? I'm not saying that that is true, but I'm also saying that it's valid for other claimant countries to introduce such a program to inculcate some sort of nationalism and cultivate a nationalist identities centered on our territorial rights. But yun, having said that, it did damage our relations with China in terms of trying to build mutual trust. Especially, we already have the Mutual Defense Treaty at our backs, no? Parang the China cannot trust us precisely because of the MDT, Mutual Defense Treaty, the alliance, and then dagdag pa yung transparency initiative, no? It really imposed an added layer of challenge in meeting the Chinese eye to eye with each other and telling them that, hey, you can deal with us on a sincere way or in a trust level, no? But unfortunately, since we're naming and shaming China, it's hard to believe from China's POV that we can be trusted. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just have one reminder and one question. One reminder that Attorney Gloria, Dr. Gloria has to leave at 11 a.m. So we have a few more minutes for questions to address to Dr. Gloria. The second is, given the transparency initiative started from 2023 up to this day, so this is around how many years? 3 years, no? What is the cost-benefit ratio now at this point? For me, the cost has been so high that it is not worth it. There is no payoff from ultimately, except what the Americans want, if that is what is achieved. But the benefit from resolving it now, and of course the Chinese embassy has expressed openly 4 times readiness to meet the Philippines halfway in any negotiation over this dispute. The benefit far, far outweighs the cost that we have suffered so far. Your reaction?
Yeah. Okay, if I may add, sir, no, I agree. The costs may have been really much higher than the intended benefits, like educating our youth, no. But another benefit on top of mind is, I think the Philippines, no, is bound to embrace this kind of initiative down the road, whether we like it or not. It might be not during this administration, it could be in the next administration, but the signs were already very clear because tensions were already rising during Duterte's time, no? And then China's power is also increasing, as we've mentioned in our lectures, no? So it's inevitable for the Philippines to adopt some sense or a strategy that would really irritate China, no, one way or another. So I think just one of the benefit na it happened and we know that it's not working. So now we are free to recalibrate, and we have seen that we are seeing that right now, no, in the policy reset that the administration is touting, no. We will not arrive in this situation where we are seriously considering a reset if it wasn't for, as you've said, you know, the ills or the mistakes of the transparency initiative. So in that sense, there's a benefit there. And at the same time, I think the transparency initiative also claims to have garnered allies and partners, no, and solidified that partnership with like-minded nations. To some extent, that's true. But whether we could have secured those support even without the transparency initiative, I believe that could have also been the case, no? That we could have secured their support in other more diplomatic or diplomatic approaches. So,
you. Oh, you have 2 more questions here from Ms. Kathy again. How important is the competence, integrity, and education of China's government officials, and what role does China's understanding of and respect for its historical experiences, like what you mentioned before, the Great Humiliation, the Century Humiliation, including the wars and other hardships it endured in the past? How do they play in shaping China's development policies.
Okay. So ano yung first part, yung competence, tama? Ng government officials? Did I get
Merit
that right?
in choosing government officials.
That's a very, yun nga, isa pa eh. Kasi it all traces back to the Confucian meritocracy and the imperial exams. And then you can see that right now in still the Gaokao exams. And then even at the graduate level, in the graduate level, they have a national level exam, yan, yung Yankao or the Yanjiu exam for graduate students. So it's like a Gaokao for graduate students. And then at the level of civil service, they still have another exam. So it's just exams on top of exams on top of exams to ensure that they really filter out the talent that worthy to be part of the civil service. And I think that's very important because also the talent that they screen, hindi lang siya talent in like academic talent, but they also consider your volunteer work, for instance, your lifestyle, your fitness. They also consider that, to be very frank about it. No, and so it's a well-rounded type of evaluation that they impose on civil servants and other aspiring officials. No, and then for me that's a very positive because they get to secure talents that really will work for the government. And at the same time, it creates this shroud of professionalism for their civil service, right? And then combined with the correct understanding of Chinese society and history, which is also included in the exams and also included in the expectation of being a good civil servant. No, it's really very important to have a correct understanding of what happened in history. No? So I think emphasis there on the correct understanding of history. I think China is an apologetic that they have their own version of history, and that is the true version of what happened to China. So regardless if we have contentions or that or wala, no, I think what matters is within China they are all united into a singular version of what transpired in history. And I think from infancy to university, even down to the civil service level, the education is consistent when it comes to the primacy of history. It plays an important role. The way you see it in how the average Chinese citizen, for instance, is very well versed in their history. The way you see it in popular culture, for instance, how historical dramas continuously ranked as top options and preferences for the normal Chinese viewer. You know? So the way you see it with in the way they speak, no, they use idioms or changyus that go back to the origins of these idioms go back to Chinese history. No? So it's not actively embraced anymore because it has become a normal part of their lives. We don't need to naturally embrace it because it's part of our day-to-day lives and it's part of our identity as Chinese. No? That we have this conscious understanding of our 5,000 years of history, and together with that, the century of humiliation as well. So, but at the same time, there are also downsides to the meritocracy of China. It has ultimately created this very competitive work environment that we are also familiar with, I think, no? With the massive unemployment in China. And at the same time, the grueling Gaokao exams also places a toll on the mental health of the Chinese youth. No? So there are those considerations as well.
I think we have one last question here. Do you think the Philippines should continue engagement with China despite and engagement coexist with the ongoing territorial maritime disputes?
Definitely. I think there's no way that we can live together if we do not engage with China, especially in our maritime disputes or territorial disputes with them. You know, I would actually go as far as saying that that is the norm already. Continuous engagement with them at the diplomatic level, spearheaded by the DFA,
and only by the DFA. I think that's also important to emphasize there. We must speak with a consistent and a predictable voice, no? So that, kasi that consistency and predictability builds mutual trust with China. Even if you erase China in the picture, if it's another counterpart, if that counterpart perceives you to be untrustworthy and magulo because there are so many talking heads and we don't know who to focus on, then it's not conducive to building mutual trust. I think it's a very big question there now. Why is it only us that's having a hard time building mutual trust with China? Where the fact is, many of us in the region also have competing territorial claims with China. I think that's some central puzzle there, which I think is something worth researching and studying then. No? But ultimately, because of that phenomena, because of that puzzle, more reason why we need to continuously engage with China with the territorial disputes. No? So in terms of what type of engagement, bilateral and multilateral, I think there shouldn't be any stigma to each. No, whatever type of engagements available there, we must be willing to sincerely negotiate with our counterparts. And with the negotiation as well, I think it's also important to take a longer view of or to have a more nuanced perspective of what China really wants. No? Like what China wants from the world and what China wants from the Philippines. No? And that nuanced perspective must be seriously cultivated amongst our diplomats and amongst our foreign policy makers. No? So that's a challenge for the current for the government, no? On how to do that. But I really think there's room there. It's an opportunity, to study China well and learn more about their history, the origins of their political systems and their struggles. And yun nga, as I've explained in my talk, how that continuously shapes China's foreign policy.
Yeah, just a final question. Then we'll ask from you a statement or closing statement for all and a message for Filipinos. Are you optimistic with the recent pronouncement of the president that he plans that the talks for joint oil and gas exploration between the Philippines and China in the West Philippine Sea are moving forward? What is your reaction to that?
Just optimism. I'm glad that it came from him. I'm pro joint development. Let's put it out there. No, I'm glad that it also came from the chief architect. But at the same time, this is not the first time that a Filipino president has actually said that they are pro joint development and exploration in the South China Sea. Except for Pinoy, I think almost all presidents after the 1995 mischief treaty articulated that sentiment. But in the Philippines, no, I think it's very sacred, for instance, yung arbitral award and how we have attached a stigma to joint exploration as something unconstitutional and probably against the spirit of the arbitral award itself. And that lies the challenge. No? I think we need to be creative in trying to explore these avenues for cooperation because I firmly believe that China, on their part, is really willing to cooperate with us and, quite frankly, share the resources in the South China Sea through joint cooperation. No? Whether that will happen is another story. No? So, iba yung pronouncements. Yes, sa level ng pronouncements, it's quite refreshing to hear that from Marcos. I just hope it will follow through. It's definitely a cause for optimism. But at the same time, Marcos is not really hindi naman talaga siya lang yung kumukumpas when it comes to our foreign policy. There are many domestic interests involved that ultimately influences the end outcome of how this will unfold. But I think it's about time that at the very least we explore joint exploration of resources in the South China Sea. So, yeah.
Closing statement and message to all Filipinos.
Yeah. Closing statement, sige for one, about China's position in the world. I don't think there's any reason to fear China's rise. No, I think China's rise is an opportunity for us to focus on our common interests, and from there, that is how we can continue building mutual trust with China and probably create a better framework in terms of how to manage our disputes and our differences. No? So, second is I think we also have to seriously listen to what China says, right? I think there are a lot of things, if you would notice from my presentation, a lot of slogans, a lot of concepts that China embeds in their foreign policy. That in itself is testament that they take their foreign policy seriously, and at the same time, they have a longer view, a vision, for China's position in the global system. That is also a room for us or an opportunity for us that we are dealing with a power that's quite frankly predictable. Predictable in a way that we can expect China to work within certain bounds and we will not be caught by surprise because China is not the United States. It has a stable political party, a party that enjoys the confidence and support of its people. And if we are going to deal with China, I think we can confidently say that we can expect some sort of consistency, uh, in terms of the policies that it will embrace, especially in its periphery and in its neighborhood. So to sum it up, two things. No? We must continue listening, seriously listening to China. And second, we must also explore or more opportunities or common interests with China.
Gloria, on behalf of the Asian Century Philippines Strategic Studies Institute and the media audience that we have and the rest of the audience that are now watching, thank you very much for your insights. It is really very substantive, your presentation. It fleshed out many of my other structural understanding. So thank you very much. I'll let the moderator end the session.
Herman, Laurel, I would also like to thank you for the invitation and really the questions are challenging and I hope you've learned some insights from me too. No? And I look forward to joining any future discussions that you might have again. No? And thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my insights with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your time. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Next, we have Adolf Linawan, Vice President for Internal Affairs.
Question. Later na lang.
We just next, we have our Vice President for Internal Affairs for Asian Century Philippines Strategic Studies Institute, Adolf Linawan, who will give us the background and the context of the recent statement of the Defense Secretary asking so-called pro-China officials to resign. Let's welcome Adolf.
I-revise ko lang po na presentation po. Very enlightening yun. Presentation na ating sita. Si Mr. Gloria. At may mga puntos po na dapat puntukan. Ang unang natin patuloy na magandang talking point dahil yung emphasis ng value system ng China places austerity at the top level. At the top level. Kasi po, tayo, nilalagay natin sa top level, hindi austerity. Karapatan. Karapatan. At yan po, makikita natin malaking differential na. Because for certain prosperity leads to development. Karapatan brings you to court. Pero problema dyan, pangalawa, yung tanong, kung mutually exclusive ang economic partnership at security threat, isagot na. Actually, it's a matter of choice. She did not even the third war chose security. Before chose economic partners. Ang problema, bumalik si Marcos sa security threat. Yan ang problema. Ngayon, kung i-regard mo na kaupat yan ay security threat, paano ka mag-establish ng economic partnership? So, yung choice natin, o rather, hindi choice natin, hindi yung choice ng ating Pangulo ngayon para sa taong bayan, na security threat ng ating tapunan, is contradictory po. Economic partnership. Alam po ninyo, noong December 2023, baka halata na ang business sector natin. Na medyo may trabaho, dahan-dahan may implement ang purpose at consideration. Dahil he was pivoting away from GDP and he was moving towards target. At talagang ipuntos po niya na yung China po, apat na additional sites sa Pilipinas. Hanggang nakarating ang December. Bakit December? Dahil yan ang sabi. Diyan mo mararamdaman ng impact ng mga political policies affecting economics. So, pagdating sa December, sa tayo lahat ng Pilipinas. Sapon. Kaya nagsalita si Teresita C. Poso, Vice Chairperson ng SM Investments Corporation, questioning the Marcos administration against maintaining a belligerent or highly confrontational stance regarding territorial disputes in the South China Sea. She urged the government to look at its own economic position and actively avoid getting caught in taking sides in the broader US-China superpower competition. Telling Bloomberg, the Philippines cannot be antagonistic towards China because after all, we can change our opinion. Sabi po ni KCC Poson, he emphasized that escalating geopolitical friction would heavily impact business confidence, trade, and economic stability. Ito ang admonition at isang business woman noong 2020. Nasaan na tayo ngayon? Kaya po ang tanong natin, Vadis, saan tayo marunong? Ma-establish natin, nasaan tayo? Tayo po ay nasa 2.3 gross domestic product. In other words, we are now experiencing this effect of what Tessie C. Poso was warning about. 3 years after considering China as a security threat, saan tayo napunta? Definitely, it is an economic partnership. Napunta po tayo sa tampungan. Doon tayo napunta. And maybe it's really timely na tumawag si President Marcos ng Russia. Bakit? Kasi po hindi na rin niya maintindihan kung ano ang problema. At kung tayo ay mag-reset mga kabansa, kailangan bumalik tayo sa basics. We have to go into the basic definition of terms. Bakit? Kasi po, in order to reset ang ibig sabihin ng Marcos, can we not put our act together? Bakit ko nasabi yan? Kasi po ang ating perspektibo sa South China Sea ay nagsisimula naman sa 1978, mga kabansa. At kung mapapansin ninyo, ang ating punto de vista ay po pasulong ng pasulong. Pero hindi naman pumupuno. Kanina narinig natin sa ating Victoria na China is rooted in history. Pero ang ating history pagdating sa South China Sea is only as old as 1970. Bakit? Dahil alam po ng ating mga matatalinong abogado na pag tayo bumalik sa history, talo tayo sa kanila. Yan ang problema. Instead of making our position pliable so that negotiation will be made possible, what we have been doing is building our own stone walling. Ay ang problema na kapag tayo na China, hindi naman ng Great Wall kung hindi Great Wall of Sand sa South China. Balikan po natin in order to define our terms. The 1978. Ano ang ginawa ng 1978? Doon po nagsimula tayong magpitahon ng ating posisyon sa Kalayaan Island Group. Na inabutan ng 1994 UNCLOS. Pero ang UNCLOS, wala namang pakialam sa sovereignty. Kundi ito ay nagbibigay laban ng sovereign rights. Ang next step natin, imbis na mag-adjust tayo ng ating posisyon sa South China Sea by virtue of UNCLOS, nagkahaman tayo. Kaya nagkikita natin, nagkahaman tayo. Bakit? Pakita na ng China ang problema. Sinabi na ni Deng Xiaoping. Bakit? Wala na ito sa punto de vista ng China, ang South China Sea, ay na by historic rights and title. Yan po ang Great Wall na inuumpog natin ang ating goal. Kaya ang ginawa ng China, okay, magkakapit-bahay tayo. Bakit natin pagkaawayan ng mga pagkakataon? So, pumasok ang China sa Declaration of Conduct with China para magkaroon ng lipo, magkaroon ng paraan para pag-usapan ng mating pagkakaunawaan. Ano ang ating ginawa? Sa ngayon sa Republic Act 2522, umiwas tayo. Umiwas tayo. Gumawa tayo ng baseline law siguro sa UNCLOS. Siguro sa UNCLOS. Pero paggawa natin ng teritoryo natin, pag-define natin ang ating teritoryo siguro sa UNCLOS, dinaluktot natin ang sarili natin batas. In contradiction with Republic Act 3046 na ina-amin ng 9522 and the 1935 and the 1973 Constitution. Ang sabi na ng isang international law expert na Titibisan Luhan, we even amended the Constitution through GR. Ito po ay aksyon ng Supreme Court 186, 107. Well, di ba kaya ng mga legislatura at ng Supreme Court ang ating constitution? Hindi na ganyan. So, doon pa lang ang may problema na. Bakit ginamit natin ang ating konstitusyon? Dahil pinaliwala natin yung nabigay sa ating teritoryo ng Amerikano sa 1898, 1898, kapura yung treaty limits. So ano ngayon? Yung treaty limits is historic rights. Papalitan ko yan mamaya. So, sinamantala ito ni Benigno Aquino III. Ano, talaga ng administrative order at una natin narinig yung pag-create ng West Philippine Sea. At ito ang ating pinasok. Ang paraan na binuksan ng China sa Declaration of Conduct 2002. Anong sabi natin sa first submission noong July 7, 2015 sa Arbitral Tribunal? Anong sabi natin? The DOC is not working. That is why we are coming before you, the Arbitral Tribunal, para itulog ang kanila. It is an outright rejection of the communications channel and instead we were to call. Ito ba? Ang mahalaga dito, the next day, sinabi na natin na abogado sa Arbitral Tribunal that Presidential Decree 1596 shall have been deemed rescinded. Alam po ba ninyo yan? Na wala ng TV 1596. That Republic Act 9522 effectively repealed 1596. So dyan pa lang malaki na ang ating problema. Pinasok natin ang 2016 na arbitral award at mga kung ano-anong submission ang ginawa natin, ang suma total na punta sa 9 dash line. Kung yun ang ating base sa ating lahat ng argumento sa China, not counted po yan. Bakit? Dahil yung palo ni kalaban ni Alex Piana, lampas na doon sa hindi. Lumampas na po ng bola. Bakit not counted? Dahil hindi naman po base ng China ang kanyang territory sa 9 dash line. Yung pong Republic of China yung gumawa, no? So, ano natin pinupuntahan dito? Mali, hindi nakikita ang mga argumento. Kaya walang solusyon. Ang tawag namin, Mr. Gloria, Pascal. Diba? Bakit? Kasi, papunta ang China sa norte, papunta ang Pilipinas sa katimugan. Yan po ang problema. At noong 2024, November, naging batas ang Republic Act 10694 na lalo pang nag-stonewall ang Pilipinas, nag-create ng mga imaginary territories, imaginary claims. So ano ngayon ang i-defend ng Department of National Defense? Yung bulok na batas. Mga kapatid, we have constructed written laws para iuntog lamang natin ang ating loob sa elephant in the room. Ano yung elephant in the room? ang Mutual Defense Treaty. Hindi tayo marunong makipag-usap sa kapwa natin. Lagi natin sinasama yung big brother natin na wala namang alam kundi gulo at saka gera. Yan ang problema ng Pilipinas. No? So, susumahin ko lang yung introductory kung napakatagal. Ha? Ito na. Yung reset will also entail review of each incident na nangyari sa West Philippine Sea. Di po ba? Di po ba? Kaya yan ang malaking iniiwasan ng Department of National Defense. Bakit po? Dahil mayroong mga general, mayroong mga DND officials na kumikita dito. May corruption sa Department of National Defense. Kaya imbis na yung ikabubuti ng sambayanan na pinagtatanggol, yung 3% lamang na sabi ng population sa July 2026 policy yan, 3% habang yan soberanyang pinagtatanggol. Lahat sila nakatutok doon. Bakit? Meron pong nakatagong kayamanan dyan. Saan ang galing? Ang suspetsa ko sa 2024 America Competes Act. Ito po ang problema niya. Bawat insidente dapat balikan dahil dyan makikita kung sino nagpupubo, kung sino wala sa pwesto, at sino ang nagdidetend lamang ng posisyon. Yan po ang iniiwasan ni Bigo Chodoro. Ha? Oh. Kaya ngayon, inipunta niya ang sarili niyang Pangulo na pro-China just because Marcos is calling for a reset. At sabi niya, lahat ng pro-China dapat mag-resign. Mr. Marcos, matatanggap po ba yan sa sarili mong Secretary of President? Maybe he did not say it directly, but dyan papunta ang narrative ni Gibo Chodoro. At sino sa palagay ninyo ang gusto niyang pumalik kay Marcos? Gibo Chodoro 2020. So yan mga kabansa ang sinasabi ko. Ha? Sa kanyang paglalahad na lahat ng tao ay na sumusuporta sa China ay dapat mag-resign. Sino mga ito? Ang unang-unang dapat mag-resign ay si Agriculture and Fisheries Secretary Kiko Chu Laurel. Bakit? Suportado siya ng China. In fact, China is the strongest supporter of Laurel's department, with no less Chinese Ambassador Jing Xian assuring the Philippines that it will sustain its fertilizer exports to the Philippines despite the instability of the Strait of Hormuz and persistent price increases. Pangalawang dapat mag-resign si Department of Tourism, Dita Angara Patay. Bakit? Dahil nagbukas ang Department of Tourism ng 3 additional Chongqing, Manila, Hangzhou, Manila, at Changsha to Manila air traffic routes. Dahil sabi ni Secretary Matay, the developments reflect the government strategy to speed up the restoration of air connectivity from China. Pangatlong dapat mag-resign ang Trade Secretary. Bakit? Aba, ang dami hong huihikayat ni Roque na mag-invest dito sa Pilipinas. Ang isang example niyan, sa loob lamang, wala pang isang taon, 16 na tindahan na ang tinayo ng Chagi, a fast-growing premium brand focus on modernizing traditional tea culture. Pangapat na dapat mag-resign si DFA Secretary Teresa Lazaro Dahil, yan, chami-chami siya ni Wang Yi. And they have said that we will open the importance of keeping communications line, managing tensions and pursuing practical ways forward. Panglimang dapat mag-resign si Police Chief General Jose Melencio Nartates dahil siya ay pumirma with the Fujian Provincial Public Security Department ng isang intelligence sharing and law enforcement cooperation against transnational criminal syndicate. Ang pang-anim na mag-resign ay ang chairman ng National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Council. Bakit po? Ibigay lamang ng Chinese Embassy ng total of $2.4 million na suporta sa disaster control. Suportado ng China. Alam po ba ninyo kung sino ang chairman ng NDRRMC? Si Mr. Bibo Chodoro. Yan ang problema. Pumunta naman tayo ngayon. Umalis tayo sa gobyerno. Sino ang mga supporters ng China sa ating society? Dapat imbestigahan si Henry C. Dapat imbestigahan ang pamilyang Lucitan. Dapat imbestigahan ang pamilyang Gokong Wei, Andrew Tan, George T. Luciano, Yuchelko, Carlos Chan, Alfredo Yao, Romena at Dennis Uy. At isama na rin, maski walang koneksyon masyado sa China, ang pamilyang Ludo at Luyen ng Cebu at mga Gaisano at Indetkay ng Mindanao sa Cagayan de Oro. Sino ba ang mga hindi inching na, by the way, sabihin na inching sa Pukien, sa Hokkien, ay uncle. Okay. Sino ba ang mga hindi sino na dapat imbestigahan? Dahil sa kanilang Chinese ties. Well, dahil si Manny Pangilinan, sabi nga kanina, nakaabang doon sa 60-40 oil exploration. Nandyan, imbestigahan si Jaime Augusto Soberbi Ayala, naka-partner ng China sa electric vehicles, real estate, energy, telecommunications, at healthcare. Alam nyo ba na ang Ayala Land grew by 32% noong 2017? Wow! Dahil sa suporta ng Chinese national. Alam niyo ba na ang Ayala rin ang mayari ng BYD? At isa pa, pinakahuli, mahaba ang lista, ang dapat imbestigahan, si Enrique Rason. Bakit? As chairman of Bloomberry, meron siyang mga tourism spots. Siya po ngayon ang pinakabayaman na Pilipino. At meron siyang International Container Terminal Services sa Shantung. Ito ang sinasabi ko. Kung tayo makikinig kay Mr. Bibo, saan matatapos ito? Security threat. At walang tigil, mga kabatsa. Tidoro has definitely overtaken the former loose tongue-in-cheek, DCG, J. Daniel. His rhetoric has become socially dangerous as it treats China, Chinese authorities, Chinese nationals, Chinese Filipinos, and ordinary Chinese people as interchangeable and progressive categories. Pagka po yung mga kategory na yan ay lumabo ang difference. Legitimate national security concern can spill over into ethnic or nationality-based prejudice. Anong tawag dyan? Sino po? Nagkaroon po ng problema dyan ng Indonesia. Nagkaroon po ng problema dyan ng Singapore. Nagkaroon po ng problema dyan ng Malaysia. Gusto ba natin ang malit sa kabuluhan? Dahil lamang may mga sektor, may mga individual sa ating lipunan na hindi makatagal. Baka may sino nakaharap. Ano ang sabi niya noong June 2026? China is a severe threat. China is wicked. Ha? So yan, repeated na yan. Ha? Yung nangyari sa Sanchia, yung sabi niya, Chinese-Filipino communities has expressed concern that national security controversies, including FOCO investigations and South China tensions, were producing increased anti-China sentiment and demands for loyalty checks. Trudeau himself recently criticized racist Chinese propaganda after a Chinese online post depicted Filipinos as monkeys as resorting, according to him, to racism. Pero yung pong principle na yan must be applied symmetrically. While Chinese social media in fact portray Filipino negatively because of Philippine government policy, Philippine government officials should have disciplined Commodore J. Tamuena when he earlier displayed AI-generated caricatures of Xi Jinping to his audience in a lecture at the Manila Universities habang siya ay nakadamit ng Philippine Coast Guard uniform. And then what happened? Nag-refuse pa siya na mag-apologize for his rash behavior. The danger with Trudeau's rhetoric is that the sustained government narrative about Chinese security threats that normalize, pag magiging new normal, nationality-based suspicion, unless officials continually distinguish Chinese government from Chinese people and from Filipinos and Chinese ancestry. Yan po ang problema. This has become serious because a fortune has now been invested. Napansin nyo ba? Araw-araw, diba? 10, 20 AI-generated social media posts na lumalabas, binibenta yan West Philippines. At lahat ng hindi sumuporta ay mga traidor sa bayan. Aba, hindi na ako nagtataka. His responsibility as Defense Secretary, therefore, extends to make the objects of whatever criticism influenced by him as precise and evidence-based. Hindi. Banat siya ng banat. Significant po ito because Trudeau is not an ordinary commentator. He is the Secretary of National Defense. And some of this propaganda have already crossed over to hate speech. Ito po ay nakakalungkot at nakakahiya at his position carrying institutional authority. Which leads to the question, sino ba talaga ang nagpo-progress science? Sino ba talaga para sa lahat? How the developments in Taiwan affect the Philippines? Well, sinasabi tayo din sa Taiwan PG, kaya tayo apektado, otherwise wala naman eh. At you should take a few from the American who has announced to the world But Taiwan is part of China. China has the right to take China Taiwan by force. Want to, when we should be behind China, then we should. How important is Philippine economy on China? How dependent? Well, as laid out by Manila, the Filipino-Chinese business, I would say 60% of the Philippine economy depends on China. China is goods, China is imports, China is exports of things. So the Philippines is economically from China without China. Impossible. Impossible because China is the biggest market in the world and the only market in Asia. What market will be the Philippines go to Japan? 120 million population. Anong market? Indonesia. Walang pera ng Indonesians. Iba yung Japan. Ano yung natin sa ato? Ano yung natin sa ato? Yan pa yun eh. Hindi nyo, yung interest influence how strong it will be funds to China. Well, there was a question from the United. Pero ano yung factor the consideration? If you don't think territorial territory concerns only two interests for the nation. It's like, try to go back to what's a lot of things. Pinaka-awayan ng territory of those two for security. Those are the two, always. Lahat malayo ang territory nila, kailangan nakakapayag ng malayo ng territory. At ikaw na malayo ng territory nila. Pag yun narinig ng infected service nila. And it's why the territory that is security. So for the Philippines, for China, it's security, it's economic, but more security. The Filipinas economic. Is the Philippines prepared for a future in which China is the dominant power in Asia? The Philippines is going to see China as a dominant power in Asia, whether it likes it or not, whether it prepares for it or not. It should be. So, how does China rise change the Philippines' traditional foreign policy calculated? Well, the traditional foreign policy of the Philippines is dependence on the United States. It completely overturns this equation. The US is declining and withdrawing from Asia. This is its whole global hegemonic superstructure is breaking down. It has lost all its functional bases in the Middle East or West Asia. It is floating in Europe and Eastern Europe, in Ukraine. There is nothing left of the US empire. And what should replace it with China return of a Conento of 32%. What should produce policy for China look like over the next 10 years? What's that? What does win-win for?
What should Philippine policy towards China look like over the next 10 years?
It can be said to set the right direction because what Marcos wants is identify what went wrong and prevent similar things to get in, which is an echo to what Yang Yi has said. Return to the correct path. Kasi kaya kami nagdadayban sa sinatag. At first sa palabas ng Pilipinas na kaya ng sa atin that has taken over our foreign policy. And you can see that even in the behavior of the American soldiers, one thing to visit Sanjia, steel factory. Tapos ang binigay na excuse, ay gagamitin daw for the 2027
Exercise.
military exercises. Ano, bubombahin nila yung steel factory? Ano gagawin nila sa revolution? Ano kaya ganyan?
Commercial.
Ha? So, ano ang dapat na direksyon natin nung sinabi ko? Implement natin itong gusto ng Marcos. Ha? Let us go back to the definition of term. A foreign country is deliberately diverting the asymmetry of sovereignty versus sovereign rights. At pinag-aaway yung dalawang concept. At pinalalabas sa propaganda nila na atin ito, atin yan. Wala naman tayong property ng mga kabansa outside of what the Americans gave us on July 4, 1946. So, balik tayo dun sa minimum position natin. And then, kung gusto natin itong show, for instance, pag-asa. Ha? Hindi na nga tayo ng semblance of karapatan by the DOC. Alam po ba ninyo yun, mga kabansa? Na kung walang DOC, wala tayong ni-hani o sa pag-asa. Pero because of the DOC recognized the status quo. Huwag lang tayong lalabas doon. Sige, develop mo. Basahin niyo yung DOC. Sabi pa nga ng China, kung gusto niyo, tutulungan pa namin kayo, i-develop yung pag-asa. That's a declaration, contact yan. Pero mag-usap tayo ng maayos. Huwag niyong gamitin for what training days ng mga sipon, mga puti. No? Huwag niyong gamitin. Mga insiksukutin, ha? Mga insiksukutin. Tapos siya pa natin ng DRP solo country. 17 anos na pinahalos namin. Okay lang. Pero lang tayo mag-repair. Kahit bang nag-repair kayo, gulo. Pagka lumabas kayo ng pag-asa, nagpunta kayo ng Sandy Cave, gulo. Diyan lang kayo. At least nasuhin nyo pa yung ibang islands na gusto nyo. At pag-usap kayo sa atin, tulong pa kami sa inyo. Pero mo bakit? Maraming konsepto po sa foreign affairs, sa foreign relations, na pwedeng pagsamahin ang sovereign interest ng isang bansa sa sovereign interest ng kabilang bansa. Ito po yung tinatawag na condominium law na international law. Pareho tayong sovereign, pero may partnership. China, kayo ang pag-asa, pero amin ang administrasyon, amin ang puntas, amin ang developer, kung may ibang mo kalkamitan, amin. Okay, sabi ng China. Walang problema yan. Pero huwag niyong pag-uubarin ang aming mga fishermen. Huwag niyong ma-arrestuhin. Huwag niyong i-board yung fishing boat sa yung military vessel. Dahil pag yan ay na-broadcast sa homeland, baka mawalan kami ng trabaho. Okay, may mga ibang tanong pa. Ubuhin mo ang oras natin Okay, next question. So, yun ang punto. Pag-usapan. Ayaw pag-usapan. Okay. Next question.
Okay.
Next question.
Actually, last na to last question na to. Ultimately, for the both of you, what kind of relationship with China best serves Philippine national interest? Deterrence, accommodation, competition, cooperation, or a combination of all four?
Cooperation, simple as that. Mutual respect.
Ganun pa ba?
Okay, it's already 11. 6:40, time for our lunch. Right. Yeah, let's close.
All right. Thank you to all of our media friends who joined us today for asking those very important questions. Of course, Dr. Enrico Gloria for his very enlightening and thought-provoking discussion earlier, to Kamento and Kado for their very incisive and thought-provoking messages. Thank you to everyone who's watching live on YouTube, Facebook, joining us via Zoom, and the replay later. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.